ZAW Arcanes will always have a special place in my heart, not because I'm a big melee player and I mostly use melee in the game, but because they started it all. These were the first weapon arcanes that got added into the game, almost 8 years ago with the release of Plains of Eidolon. Hi, welcome to the ZAW Arcane Guide. Today I'm gonna go through all the ZAW Arcanes, tell you what they do, where to get them, but most importantly try to help you understand them, because knowing something is good is useless if you don't know why. So let's get right to it, shall we? The vast majority of ZAW Arcanes, with the exception of 2 which I will cover at the end, are simply purchased from Hock in Cetus for Ostron standing. All the ZAW Arcanes go up to rank 3 and they're equipable in a special ZAW Arcane slot which can be found on modular melee weapons. Exodia Brave triggers on a heavy attack kill and grants you up to 5 energy regenerated per second for 4 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. This is one of the more popular ZAW Arcanes for a reason. The fact that it can stack up to 3 times for a total of up to 15 energy per second is just very good. It can very easily sustain even some of the most power-hungry builds in the game. However, it is energy regeneration, so channeled abilities that drain energy over time, will completely nullify it. The downside of Exodia Brave is that it only triggers on a direct heavy attack kill. Damage over time, even if created with a heavy attack, does not work. To be fair, it's not much of a downside, as heavy attack builds, whether it be just straight up heavy attack builds or even Tennokai hybrid setups, usually have more than enough damage on their heavies to take care of the enemy in a single hit. The exception to that is heavy attack setups that rely on the damage over time from, for example, a forced slash proc. It's generally better on pure heavy attack setups because you can trigger the arcane whenever you want, though it's usually enough even on a Tennokai setup, it just might not sustain some of the more power-hungry frames. So basically, if you need a super reliable way of generating energy, Exodia Brave is a really good pick. Exodia Force triggers on a status effect and it gives you a 50% chance to deal up to 200% weapon damage to enemies within 6 meters of you. Now while the damage does have full follow through, it also comes with 100% fall off. The damage of Force actually scales rather well. It's affected by the combo counter, stance damage multipliers, base damage, elemental damage, and faction damage mods. It, however, can never proc status or deal a critical strike, even if you scale a bunch of flat crit like from Arcane Avenger. This is a genetically good arcane that will work on most status-based weapons, but it shines on vortex setups because it gives you an easy way to group enemies up, which is precisely what you want to do if you want to take full advantage of this arcane because of the harsh fall-off. Here is an example build that I use on one of my own ZAWs, the Life Hunt site, which is a heavy blade. I group enemies up using Vortex that's triggered via a magnetic proc that comes from my pet, and then I mow the enemies down with a combination of force, gas and electricity for triple AoE damage. Now, while this is a pretty generic status arcane, I would only recommend it on weapons that can hit at least 100% status, because you ideally want to roll that 50% chance to trigger it every time you hit something. That doesn't mean it's bad or you don't want to use it on other weapons, it's just that it's a lot better obviously when you can trigger it with roughly about every other hit. Exodia Hunt triggers on a slam and it gives you a 50% chance to pull in enemies from up to 12 meters. The cool thing here is that it can be triggered by any slam, so a regular slam attack, a heavy slam attack, or even a slam within a melee combo. So it can actually be used in normal builds if you have the right setup on staves, swords, polearms, heavy blades, and hammers. The way it works is also different from a lot of other vortex effects. Usually these effects create a point to which they drag enemies, but Exodia Hunt drags the enemies towards your frame for a solid few seconds, so even if you're moving around, the enemies will be dragged behind you. This actually works in your favor if you have a big melee weapon that can hit behind you, like a hammer or a heavy blade, or you're using an ability that deals damage around or behind your frame. Here is once again an example setup that I actually use myself on the Hammer of Vamos, which is, surprise surprise, a hammer ZAW. I actually prefer Exodia Hunt to melee vortex on most weapons where I can use it. It feels a lot better and it doesn't require a magnetic proc, you just need to have a slam somewhere in your combo. It's also pretty busted with the right setup, like can you imagine having Vortex and Influence on a melee weapon at the same time? Well, you don't have to, because if you're using a ZAW that has a slam somewhere in its combo, you can do basically just that, run an Influence setup and then put on Exodia Hunt. So while it is somewhat restrictive, Exodia Hunt is in my eyes an absolutely top tier arcane. Exodia Might has a 50% chance to trigger on a finisher kill and it grants up to 30% lifesteal for 8 seconds. This is a pretty solid healing arcane if you have some way to open the enemies up to finishers, whether that be via Warframe abilities or even something like Dizzying Round. Now, this should trigger on all finishers, but it can sometimes be a little bit iffy with things like ground finishers, for example. Also, the lifesteal only applies to melee damage, so you can't lifesteal with your primary or your secondary. Though that's not necessarily terrible because melee finishers are melee damage, so you can just sustain yourself and constantly heal up by chaining finishers. It's a decent arcane if you're set up black healing, and also since melee weapons do so much damage, you don't even really have to rank it up most of the time. Exodia Triumph is active at all times and it gives you an up to 50% additional combo count chance. This arcane has been made mostly irrelevant with the addition of Tennokai. There aren't that many weapons or setups that would want to generate combo faster. And even those that would are generally better off with Crescendo instead. It made sense when it first came out, because if you wanted to do heavy, chunky, fully charged heavy attacks, you had to build the combo and then spend it. Build it, spend it, build it, spend it. But that's no longer the case because you can simply put on Tennokai, and unless you miss the Tennokai window, never spend your combo. I genuinely cannot think of a setup where I would want to use Exodia Triumph, though if you can think of something, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. The problem is that by running this arcane, you're not running one of the other better ZAW Arcanes instead. And the same goes for Exodia Valor, which can give you up to 200% additional combo count chance on lifted enemies. This one provides substantially faster combo generation than even Triumph, but it's also more restrictive because it requires you to lift the enemies up first. I once again cannot think of a setup that would want to run this over another ZAW Arcane, or a setup that would be better off with this arcane than with Crescendo or Tennokai. Exodia Triumph and Valor are simply relics of the past. Their one saving grace is that they're cheap and easy to get, so if you want to utilize something like Secondary Outburst but don't have Crescendo yet, you can use one of these two until you get it. Now, these last two arcanes are not available from Hawkin Cetus, they're instead available through events. They were first introduced with the Plague Star event and return every time the Plague Star event returns, and they're also usually available from Kylie during Nights of Nabaris, which is the Halloween event. Exodia Epidemic is triggered by a bullet jump or a double jump, and it makes your next slam emit a shockwave that travels forward and suspends enemies in the air for up to 4 seconds. The wave is roughly about 5 meters wide, it travels for roughly about 31 meters, it deals 10 blast damage to enemies it passes through, and it explodes for a little bit of viral damage in a 7-meter radius at the end. The wave has no status chance, no crit chance or crit multiplier, and it's not affected by most damaging multipliers. The explosion at the end, however, is a little bit better. It does roughly about 30% of your ZAW's damage and it copies its crit and status. It can also trigger things like duplicate, but the biggest blunder here I think is that it does not scale with elemental mods. Like, at all. Now, whenever I badmouth this arcane, people always defend it by saying that it's really good with melee afflictions. Except it's not. There is an important difference between lifting enemies and suspending them in the air. Lifting enemies will trigger afflictions, suspending them will not. The reason it can sometimes look like it works is because slams inherently stagger or knock enemies down, so you're triggering afflictions with the slam, not with the wave from Epidemic. So in the end, all this arcane does is it adds a bit of crowd control and it opens enemies up to ground finishers. That's it. And last but definitely not least, we have Exodia Contagion. This one makes it so that whenever you bullet jump or double jump, if you then aim glide and do an air attack, you fire out a projectile that explodes in an 8-meter radius, with its damage being increased by up to 400% after it's traveled for over 30 meters. This used to be straight up the most busted thing in the game back in the day, and it's still really good even today. The projectile does 2 times the ZAW's damage on a direct hit split equally between impact, slash and puncture, with the explosion doing 5 times the ZAW damage in pure viral. And if that's not enough, direct hits also leave behind a damage over time, which does blast damage equal to the ZAW's damage. This thing hits like a truck. Additionally, the crit chance, crit damage and status chance are based off of the ZAW stats, and they're affected by most mods. Even attack speed works, it scales the speed of the projectile. But perhaps the best thing about the projectile you get with Exodia Contagion, and the thing that still keeps it relevant even today, is that it counts as your melee hit. So you can, for example, not only trigger, but take advantage of influence with it. I unfortunately don't have the right ZAW for this, it's actually something I want to build in the future, but a setup that looks something like this is gonna result in an absolute clown show. The main downside of Contagion is that it might simply not be your cup of tea. It's rather fiddly. You have to double jump or bullet jump, and then you have to aim glide, and then you have to air attack without slamming instead. But I would very much recommend you try it out at least once, because you might really like it. I would also highly recommend you look up different types of Contagion builds. Yes, you can do it with Influence, but there are other, more varied Contagion setups that you can use as well. It's all thanks to the fact that this is a projectile while simultaneously being a melee attack, so a lot of things are multiplicative here. So if you see this Arcane being sold somewhere in the game, definitely buy it. It's worth it. And that is it for all the ZAW Arcanes and all the weapon Arcanes actually, because we've already covered primary, secondary, melee, and KITGUN in previous videos that you will find in the description and in a comment down below. I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and you've learned something new today, even though these Arcanes have been in the game for 8 years, something like that. And finally, I would like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much guys, I really appreciate your support, it means a lot to me. And I'll see you next time, bye bye.